Hello and welcome to the Waynesburg Effect. I'm Ryan Schwertfeger here alongside fellow panelist Paige Carter. The way the show works is that each panelist will bring up a current event topic that has an effect on the community, us as college students, or even all of us as Americans. Now each panelist will get an opportunity to give their opinion on the issue at hand, and we may even engage in a friendly debate on the topic. While we each have our own opinions, we also do our best to ensure that what we say is backed up with facts, so that you, the viewer, can not only be more informed, but also capable to form your own opinions on how the topic we discuss affects you. This is the Waynesburg Effect. Welcome back to the Waynesburg Effect. In our next episode, we're going to be proud to introduce our new panelist, Mr. Sean Mead. We look forward to Mr. Mead joining the program, and we hope you'll tune in again soon to get to know him and to hear Sean's side of the news. But first, with our first discussion topic, here's Paige Carter.
The recent outbreak of measles has been said to be beyond alarming, and as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration declared that the measles vaccine should be used by everyone who has not been vaccinated, more questions are being raised among the major and minor political parties. Now, Ryan, obviously the more leftist side of things is in favor of this vaccination being a federal mandate. On the right side, the Republicans, they're seeing it more as an individual right and that the parents should decide. But something that's been interesting that's been coming up in the media a lot is Ron Paul's son, Rand Paul, who is a renowned libertarian and one of the only renowned libertarians, has really taken a strong opinion on this issue. Can you talk a little bit about that and just give us some insight as to what you think should happen with this outbreak?
Well, in terms of Rand Paul, I mean, a lot of people can speculate that he's possibly going to be running for president, so that would be a good reason to maybe bring this up a bit more, kind of go in the public square and talk about this. I also know that New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was over in London on a trade mission, and he also had to address the comment about vaccines, and that got a little controversial. So I think it's definitely a political hot-button issue, but at the same time, it's not just something that's only being talked about by politicians. This is something that's actually affecting families and schools and towns across the country. I think Rand Paul's position, which is the libertarian, Republican, conservative, libertarian position to some extent, is that parents should have the option to choose whether they want to give their child the vaccine or not. Some people are saying this is because of possibly it leads to autism. However, research for the most part has shown that there is no direct connection at all. Some people are doing this saying they don't want to give it for religious reasons or just plainly the overarching purpose of I don't want the federal government telling me what I have to do to my children. I think in terms of what we saw, because this whole story came up originally because of Disneyland, about how there was an outbreak of the measles at Disneyland, and now all of a sudden we're starting to talk about exactly how it started, why it spread so fast, and I think originally what we have to look at is not just, all right, it spread, yes, but what led to it spreading in the first place, and that's where we are now with the debate of did people get the vaccine or not. I think generally speaking, I had the vaccine. I think people should get the vaccine. It's, for the most part, I think it's like 99.9% effective. So I think definitely it should be something parents do to their children, is to give them the vaccine. However, I do see on the other flip side, in terms of it's the federal government telling people you have to do this, which could be dangerous and lead to even worse things down the road.
Well, I think that people see this as legitimate, as in the federal government saying this needs to be a thing, is because it's involving public schools.
Correct.
So it's like this federal institution is providing this place for your child to learn, and they then in turn have the right to say, if you're going to be here, then you need to have this vaccination for the purpose of public order and for the purpose of the safety of the other children. So the Republicans, I've heard the argument, if it should be the parents' decision, but if they're going to a public school, then they have to get it. But to me, that kind of just seems it seems like it's just convoluting the issue. Like it's taking too much of a like philosophical stance on it, because honestly, if your child is going to be in the school, then they should probably get it. So it doesn't really matter which way you say it. So I'm guessing that you're just saying that with the medical concerns being out of the picture, that this needs to be more developed in research, and that as we move into this new generation, that it's more common for children to see vaccinations? Because that's a very new concept.
Well, I don't know if there actually needs to be more research. I mean, a lot of research, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, because of this whole issue of possibly vaccines leading to autism, but that's now been found for the most part to not be true. So I think that for the most part, except for there's like very, very few connections between the two. So I think that argument for the most part can be thrown out the window. What I do still have a little hesitation about with is obviously, this is a starting point for more government intervention in our lives, and also if there is a religious concern to that. I have a friend back at home, he's a Christian scientist, and they are very stringy when it comes to modern medicines. And even though he is part of the camp, his family's part of the camp about modern medicine and shots possibly having some autism connection, I disagree with him. However, we both went to the same school system. He didn't really get sick too often, and I think that his parents do have the right to decide, my child is not going to get this shot. However, I think in terms of going to a public school where it's the greater good for the greatest number and it's being run by the local and state government, I think then that becomes a local and state government issue whether they want to require that or not. I know I also read somewhere that there are several schools in California that are private schools, and they also have it written out that it is their option, the parents choosing, they don't have to do the vaccine. Because I believe the public schools there, they do require you to have the vaccine, but if you don't believe that, you can go to a private school. And I think maybe that's something a little bit closer to what we should be seeing. Public schools run by the government, you have to conform to our rules. If you're going over, if you don't believe in that, then you can go to a private school.
But what then does the government do with people who are religious? Because not everyone can afford to send their child to a public school where that is an option. So federally, what should happen to the people who have religious exemption? Which in this county, they're trying to remove the exemption clause, which would, I assume, include the religious aspect. But going back to my question, what does the federal government do about people of religious descent who are sending their kids to a public school, not out of want, but out of no other option?
Well, I think it's very hard. I think it's going to have to come down to a school district by school district decision. Obviously, if there's some school districts that maybe have more children who fall under that religious exemption, then it would be, it's a sizable minority that they were going to have to listen to them and make sure that that's accepted. If it's only 1 or 2 people that are in the school district, I feel bad for them. Maybe they could work out some sort of agreement or say, could you maybe get 1 or 2 of these shots, but you don't have to get these. Find the ones that most people would agree with. But I think this is going to be an issue that until there's maybe even a little bit more research and working with parents and school districts, that this is going to have to be solved.
Yeah, it is a very daunting, utilitarian kind of question as to what to do. But I think you had some great insights.
Thank you.
Up next, we will have a look at the Brian Williams debacle.
There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
If you watch the evening news, you may have heard many a time, "This is the NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams." However, news anchor Brian Williams has been officially suspended for 6 months without pay. Accused of fabricating and exaggerating stories, Williams is facing intense backlash from all sides of the media and public landscape. A poll even found that 40% of Americans think he should resign and leave the post of NBC Nightly News anchor. Yet many of you watching may not have even heard that familiar opening phrase in a while or even at all. With the rise and power of cable news channels and the preference of younger people to get their news online and from social media, is this Brian Williams saga the final nail in the coffin of this broadcast television news decline? So Paige, I know you're always more hip and trendy than I am, which we'll be seeing actually in a later segment. But I had to ask, where do you get your news from, and do you think that this is a sign of the broadcast news decline?
I have kind of a not very popular opinion on getting news sources. I think that it is criminal that in this day and age we have access to so many direct government documents. You can watch CNN and actually watch the Senate making decisions. And I think that's the best and most clear way to get your news if you want to have an unbiased opinion. I think a lot of people do resort to the national networks, if you're Republican, Fox News, if you're Democrat, CNN. And to me, that just seems so streamlined and so inductive and criminal. But as far as this goes, Brian Williams was known not only slightly in this generation, but the generation before him. He's famous news broadcaster, and I think that his integrity is completely just dissolved with this. And NBC has every right to go through. I heard that they were going through every story that he reported and checking the legitimacy of it. And I say I applaud them, because I think that that was not right for him to have such a hold over the public and to abuse that power. And I'm very proud of the way NBC has acted. 6 months seems too minimal in my opinion.
Well, in terms of going into all of the different stories, I think that that's a good idea that NBC does that. However, I actually just saw something the other day that said that besides not even looking into news stories, they're looking into, oh, well, Brian Williams said that he rescued a puppy. Well, was it one puppy or was it two puppies? What did he actually do? Yeah. And I think it's like, that might be a little, now it's almost like a witch hunt, in my opinion. I think that they do have to look into, was he telling the truth in his reporting? Especially, we keep hearing about Hurricane Katrina, whether he actually saw certain things that he saw while he was down there, or what started this whole debate and debacle in the first place, which was he said that the plane that he was in when he was in the Iraq War was targeted by a rocket-propelled grenade, when actually it was the one in front of him, and whether that led to where we are today with this suspension. But what do you think is appropriate in terms of doing this investigation? I mean, should they be looking into, do you think it's a good idea that you should look into all the stories, or do you think at a certain point it becomes a little too much?
Ryan, I honestly think that they have every right to investigate, because what he said had an impact, it had weight, because he gained credibility, he earned the public's trust, and now we are left to question everything he ever did. And that's no one's fault but his. And I think they wouldn't look into it if it didn't matter. And if it seems very simple what they're researching, I mean, it's their right to know. But what do you think about the public's reaction to this whole thing? Like with Brian Williams, what do you think the general consensus is, and what they think NBC is doing is okay or not?
Well, we saw earlier that the poll had the 40% of people saying that he should resign and leave completely. I think it's a good idea, like you said, for NBC to investigate him to at least a certain extent. I think the public also wants to see this happening. Let's make sure, we trust these people. A lot of people remember the times of Walter Cronkite, and he was the most trusted person in news. And a lot of people kind of thought, oh, Brian Williams, he seems kind of trustworthy. He's live reporting. He's doing all this stuff. And I think now that's been shattered. Mm-hmm. And that actually leads to some interesting data that I saw. A lot of people in our age group, the millennial age group, 66% of people in our age group say they are not confident that the news they receive is accurate, which I thought was quite fascinating. And only 18% of our age group use television as their primary news source, which is, in my opinion, that's a little much lower than I thought it would be. And so I want to kind of twist what you asked me and ask it back to you. Yes, I think a lot of the people who do watch NBC Nightly News are disappointed in Brian Williams. They're disappointed that it looks like he fabricated some stories and he exaggerated. But then the question then is, people in our age group, the future of America, are we even watching the Nightly News with Brian Williams to begin with?
Yeah.
And is something like this pretty much saying, maybe it's time that the broadcast networks, we get out of the news business?
I mean, I think that the news broadcasting is definitely coming to an end. Everyone's resorting to the internet more for everything. But I also think that that statistic does not surprise me. 66% of people don't believe what they hear. And I think Brian Williams is just unfortunately taking the grunt of a longer issue that's been underlying for much longer in time. I think that over-exaggeration is common, and I think that's even more easy on the internet, to exaggerate or to kind of twist things to your angle. And if you read like a certain news report from a website that's leaning one way dominantly, you'll find that they can make a story seem so much more in their favor than if you would go on another person's opinion. So it's just this constant battle of trying to decide what's true and based on what merit. And I think that this is a perfect example of that being so easy to skew. With Brian Williams exaggerating stories, it leaves me to wonder what else is being exaggerated. Who else do I trust? Even my favorite journalists, are they giving me a one-sided opinion that doesn't have any warrant? I mean, who's to really say? It definitely raises a lot of questions, and I hope that journalistic integrity is strongly enforced after this, and people are much more skeptical, because we need to be skeptical. It's news. This is what we are deciding as truth, and this is how we're forming our opinions of the world. We shouldn't just accept it with open arms, no matter the person or the network or the means.
Well, it's very interesting insight, and we're definitely going to have to see, is Brian Williams going to come back in 6 months after this
It wouldn't
time
surprise
passes?
me if he didn't.
I guess time will tell, and we'll find out from there. But coming up next, ISIS on the rise. Stay tuned.
Thank you. You got a king?
Go fish!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Today, President Obama asked Congress to formally authorize military force against the terrorist network. This opened the door to limited ground combat operations against the Islamic States. Jordan is also taking action against the terrorist group. Jordan carried out 56 airstrikes against the Islamic State in recent days as King Abdullah of Jordan continued to make good on his promise to avenge the immolation of a Jordanian pilot by the militant Sunni group. As ISIS continues to attack, their experience and successes on the battlefields in Syria and Iraq have armed this group with advanced capabilities that most terrorist groups do not have. The question remains, which countries are no longer safe? Now, Ryan, it's been so hard just this week to keep up with all of the action that ISIS has been taking. I mentioned the Jordanian pilot. We have Kayla, the American hostage that was killed, brutally murdered by ISIS. And it's just been absolutely, it seems out of the blue how fast they're acting. Do you see any correlation, or do you have any theories about why ISIS is acting now?
Well, I mean, I think they've obviously seen that the countries that are the big powers at will aren't doing anything. I mean, for the most part, all right, we've helped out a little bit. I think we've done maybe a few airstrikes in the past before. We're talking to other countries about what we should do. But for the most part, America and other big powers around the world have not taken substantial actions against ISIS and these other radical Islamic groups. And I think it's about time that the president, instead of just saying, oh, they're just these little factions here and there, we identify what the problem is and we do something about it. And we're seeing that as of late with President Obama coming out saying that he wants to take some action against ISIS, and he's talking to Congress. Hopefully that both of them will come together and find some sort of consensus as to what they want to do. Obviously, we're seeing that in the House, I think they'd probably end up approving something. In the Senate, I know they're going to be going back and forth between all the different committees. I know Senator John McCain, he's always one of the people at the forefront of these war issues, and he's now the head of the Armed Services Committee. So I think we'll see him and other Republicans on that committee. They're going to be discussing what's the best option. However, interestingly enough, I mean, there is even some Democrats who aren't on board with President Obama's plan. I read something that says that Adam Schiff of California, he's in the House, he's the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, and he actually said that as part of President Obama's initial plan that he's put out, that it set no geographic limits to the military campaign. So on one hand, you have Republicans saying, I blame the president that we haven't done anything earlier, and are we doing enough? And then even people on his own party are saying, I don't know, this seems a little too broad. Maybe we can work together and narrow it a little bit because they're still a little nervous as to what we're going to end up doing. Yeah. So I think there's still, obviously there's going to be a lot of time that passes, probably before something passes. But hopefully President Obama and Congress are going to be able to work together, find something that they want to do in order to confront this issue, because America and these other countries have just waited too long. ISIS has gained so much power, and as you said, we're starting to see these things back to back to back. We had the the two people from Japan, we had the Jordanian pilot, we have the young American girl, and then we had the reporters, of course, with James Foley, and it just continues to compound and compound. And we've just let it go, I think, too long, and I just hope it isn't too late to take action and deal with ISIS.
I don't think that I don't think this is going to take long. You mentioned how you hopefully that Obama and Congress can come to a decision. But I'm finally starting to believe that the president is seeing this as a grave threat to the United States. But I will say he's still very apprehensive about putting ground combat into play. He's in very much a favor of airstrikes, and obviously he's trying to, to limit casualties of citizens, and that's completely understandable. But there does come a point where we have to take action because, like we mentioned, ISIS is just relentless right now. So you mentioned how you said that people have been taking way too long to take action against this group, and now it's starting to come into fruition. Do you think that Jordan waited too long? I mean, they were always very close to the situation, but they were kind of retaliating, recognizing that. So do you think that the king of Jordan waited too long and that it shouldn't have come to that pilot's death in order for them to really...
I'm not sure if he necessarily waited too long, to answer your question. I think America should have acted earlier. Obviously, we're the world superpower, and just like on 9/11, we were attacked, so then we took retaliatory action. The same thing with all these the journalists, and now I think having Kylie being killed, I think that kind of is President Obama's like, all right, I think I've had enough. We need to do something now. Jordan, on the other hand, they were in the area, they were upset about it, they voiced their opposition to ISIS, but in the moment that one of their people, that pilot that was a national hero in Jordan, got killed, we're not going to stand for this, we're going to take action, which is what they're doing. I think maybe they should have done something a little earlier, but in terms of they attacked them, they're going to retaliate. America, we waited too long to do something about it, and I think that empowered ISIS to say, oh, well, if they're not going to do anything about it, and these other people, they're arguing about it, well, we can just keep doing what we're doing. We keep spreading, we can keep going through these towns and villages, and I'm just afraid that, the reason, I know you brought up about how you think it's going to be something swift in terms of action. I hope that does happen. I'm a little skeptical because foreign policy in America has always been a tricky situation, not just between Republicans and Democrats, but even Congress and the president. It's always a matter of, is politics going to play a more important role? Is national security? Are the people who I share ideological viewpoints with, are they going to be happy with what I'm doing? And as I said with Mr. Schiff of California, even people in his own party aren't happy, and he's on a pretty high committee of the House Intelligence Committee. The only part where I am, like you said, a little skeptical about is I feel like this is almost a repeat of what we saw 100 years ago. My great-grandmother on my mom's side of the family survived the Armenian genocide, which will be 100 years since that happened in April. And I think we saw a very similar thing. We had a group of people who wanted to establish an Islamic caliphate, and the Armenian people, they were Christians, and they were in their way, and they just did whatever they could to get rid of them. And they ended up killing 1.5 million Armenians. And part of the things that they did inspired Nazi Germany, what they did with the Jews and so many others. And I'm just a little concerned that we're going to end up almost seeing the same thing here 100 years later. They're going after these people who don't want to become Islamic and be part of their caliphate and what they want to do, and I think that we might have waited just a little too long. I still think there's some hope, but I think we might have waited just a little too long, and it's going to go on for a little bit more than we thought.
The nation definitely needs to be on its toes, not only from a legislative perspective and political, but I think just as a public. And I'm interested in seeing how this plays a part in the election coming up and who we will elect to deal with the situation, because it's not going to just dissipate.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Now, what else rides New York City subway trains besides millions of people? It shouldn't come as a surprise, but tons of germs. Now, a group of scientists from Weill Cornell Medical College spent more than a year studying it. Rachel Crane has more details and reaction.
An average of 5.5 million people ride the New York City subway system every day. So it's only natural that it would be teeming with bacteria. A new study called PathoMap took over 3,000 samples from all of the subway stations to map the microgenomics of the city, something that has never been done before. And the findings may surprise you, even gross you out. What would you say if I told you that scientists just found hundreds of different strands of bacteria in New York City subway stations?
That is really gross, and I don't even want to touch the floor anymore.
It's actually scary.
Obviously, that is very concerning. Also shocking, almost half the DNA that was sampled is unidentifiable, meaning they do not match any other known organisms known to scientists. The study collected samples from turnstiles, garbage cans, subway poles, benches, and in some subway stations, they found microbes of meningitis, anthrax, E. coli, even the bubonic plague.
I'd say it's about time to start practicing good hand washing.
Now that's gross. That's gross.
But don't worry, the bacteria poses no threat to public safety. They were found at incredibly low levels, and some of them, they weren't even active. In fact, they also found good bacteria. In hearing this and learning this, is that going to change the way you ride the subways?
Definitely.
And is it going to change the way you ride the subways now?
No, because I've always rode the subways with my hands in my pocket or either, sitting down trying to touch anything.
The bacteria found in the subway is really not all that different from the amount found above ground. I mean, we're surrounded by countless bacteria and we're doing just fine. But that's not going to stop me from using my sanitizer. Gotta stay clean.
Thank you for joining us on the Waynesburg Effect. We'll see you next time.